Good morning and welcome to the weekly dementia blog sponsored by Spectrum Med. My name is Dr. David Hutchings, and first I want to say I'm very excited to be doing a podcast, a national podcast here in about an hour, specifically asking about obviously Alzheimer's disease and different types of vaccinations, what's going on with clinical trials, as well as kind of debunking some of the myths. For example, I did hear somebody called my office the other day and actually had asked about the news story that was on the news that somebody had Alzheimer's and has tried this, I think it was like a fruit diet or something, and the disease completely went away. So unfortunately, there is some things out there that quite are not accurate, both from a medical standpoint and a science standpoint. So we'll be talking about some of that on the podcast. So looking forward to doing that. So that has actually kind of driven, we've been doing a series on what to do after the diagnosis, but one of the things I've gotten a lot of questions on is the clinical trials that are going on and basically what's out there, what's working. I've said this many times before. I hope one day I actually can just wake up and not have a job and actually just work here on my farm and not have to worry about this disease, and we can actually beat it. I feel like we will beat this disease one day. I really do. But basically, when we look at the vaccinations and the pharmacological trials that are going on, we have to target three main things. Number one, the plaques that are in the brain. We've talked about these in previous blogs. We have to target the tangles, which are caused by the breakdown of the tau proteins. And then we have to target the inflammation. So when we look at first the plaques, we have seen the monoclonal antibodies help actually prevent some of these clumping of we see in the plaques within the brain cells. And there are two drugs, CD106 and CNP250, that have shown great results in clinical trials. So what these are helping to do in the clinical trials is actually the beta amyloid plaques interact with what we call fin proteins, and it makes the fin begin to kind of overreact, which damages the synapse between the basically the space in between the neurons. So these medications are showing some promise and help break down some of these plaques and prevent some of these plaques in patients in the study who have two copies of the Alzheimer's gene, which is the amyloid, the apolipoprotein number 4. That meaning if you have two copies, you got a copy from both mom and dad. So great, hope and promise with CD106 and CNP250 with that, with breaking some down some of those plaques. As far as the tau proteins, remember this is almost like if I could almost draw a railroad track. This is what a railroad track would look like. So this is your tau protein. What happens is that the middle of the railroad track begins to go away. And so what happens is there's no structure to the axon of the neuron, so it begins to kind of tangle at that point. One vaccination that has been shown promise with this in clinical research studies and clinical trials is AAD vaccination 1. That's AAD vaccination 1. And I know in the last research study that came out, I think in September of 2019, showed about a 98.2% improvement, meaning that 98.2% of the patients that were given AAD vaccination 1 produced antibodies to be able to fight the breakdown of the tau protein. And then lastly, the inflammation. So when we look at the inflammation piece, what happens, Alzheimer's disease causes chronic low-level cell inflammation within the brain cell itself. And two medications that are in clinical trials that have shown promise to help reduce this inflammation is Leukin and also another medication called Actus. So again, great stuff on the horizon, and we'll continue to keep everybody updated on some of these clinical trials, as well as continue the series of what to do after the diagnosis. And as again, this disease is incredibly complicated. It's incredibly difficult for the patient, the families, many different forms. So we have a lot of topics to cover. Look forward to seeing you again next week, and thanks for tuning in. Thank you.